Hello everyone. My name is Scarlett, I'm 43 years old, and I'm currently on a weight loss journey for the holiday season. Truth be told, I've always had a complicated relationship with food. I love it, but it doesn't love me back the way I want it to. Who can resist a delicious pumpkin pie or a crispy cookie during the holiday season? But that's for later, because today, I have another story to tell. An old story that still resonates with me, like it happened yesterday. Let's rewind to when I was 23, the age when people are still full of enthusiasm, dreams, and hopes for the perfect love. At that time, I was engaged to a man named David. Not only was he handsome, but he was also smart, funny, and extremely thoughtful. I felt incredibly lucky to have found a man like him. Our relationship was so smooth that I thought I had a bright future in my hands. But there was one thing I didn't anticipate: my family. It all started that Thanksgiving. I was so excited because it was the first time I was going to introduce David to my family. In my head, I had a wonderful vision: my parents would be happy to see me happy, and my sister, Amara, would reminisce about our childhood and share the joy of my upcoming marriage. But I was wrong. I was so wrong. From the first moment I stepped into the house, I sensed something was wrong. Amara, my sister, who was 3 years older than me, stood there, her eyes lighting up when she saw David. At the time, I didn't think much of it. I told myself, she must be happy for me. But my instincts told me that it was more than just happiness. There was something strange in her eyes. At that time, I still didn't know that those eyes would change my whole life. And I never imagined that just a few months later I would lose my own family, just because of the person I loved and trusted the most, my sister. But before I go into the details of that tragedy, let me tell you about my family. So that you can understand why things happened like that, and why I, even though I was the youngest daughter, was always the abandoned one in my family. When I walked through the door of my parents' house that day, I was expecting a warm evening filled with laughter. The smell of roast turkey wafted through the air, mingling with the cinnamon scent of the pumpkin pie my mother was baking in the kitchen. I squeezed David's hand, smiling eagerly. This was his first time meeting my family, and I wanted everything to be perfect. My father was a calm, serious man, but I knew he loved me. My mother, a strong, traditional woman, was also a hardliner when it came to her daughter's love life. But I still believed that if they saw David, they would understand why I loved him. However, what worried me the most was Amara, my older sister. Amara was 3 years older than me, beautiful in a way that I could never match. She had long, flowing hair, piercing eyes, and a charming smile that could make anyone's heart flutter. Since childhood, Amara has always been the center of attention. If I was cheerful, lively, and somewhat naive, she was sharp and always knew how to control everything according to her will. I had hoped this time would be different. I had thought that, at least in this important moment of my life, she would support me. But as soon as I introduced David to my family, I noticed a change in Amara's eyes. She looked at him with a look I had never seen before, interest mixed with something I couldn't name. I told myself that maybe I was imagining things. But then, throughout dinner, I couldn't help but notice the way she smiled at him, the way she tilted her head as she listened to him, and the way David seemed to be caught up in that charm. I felt like I was invisible in my own life story. In the days that followed, my insecurities grew. Amara started texting David, for reasonable reasons at first, asking about his work, asking if he liked my mom's cooking. But then the conversations got longer, the texts became more frequent, and David seemed to let it go. I tried to convince myself that I was overthinking things. That I was being irrationally jealous. But then, one day, when I stumbled upon my sister and David talking in the kitchen, so close, so intimate, I knew I couldn't fool myself anymore. Amara smiled at me when I walked in, but there was no remorse in her eyes. It was more like a challenge. Should I say something? Should I tell her that I knew what she was doing? But I didn't. I was afraid that if I spoke out, I would lose both the man I loved and my family. My wedding day was supposed to be the happiest day of my life. I had dreamed of this moment since I was a child, wearing a pure white dress, walking down an aisle of flowers, seeing the man I loved waiting at the end of the path. But when the moment arrived, I didn't feel the happiness I had imagined. Instead, I felt a stifling tension that filled the room. I looked around the magnificent wedding hall, where white silk was delicately tied to each row of chairs. The shimmering chandeliers cast a warm glow, but it did nothing to dispel the coldness in my heart. Whispers rose among the guests. I knew they were gossiping about my family, about my absent parents, and even about my sister. My mother didn't come. My father didn't either. I had begged them, had hoped until the last minute that they would change their minds. But even as I wore the wedding dress, even as I held the phone in my hand, the screen was blank, not a single message from my mother. I knew that I had been truly rejected by my family. I knew all too well why they were against it. My mother didn't believe that David truly loved me. She thought that I was just a second choice, that if given the chance, he would choose Amara. And more than that, she couldn't forgive me for putting love above family. I can't forget the last conversation I had with my mother, just a few days before the wedding. She looked at me with eyes full of disappointment, her voice trembling with anger. "Do you know what you're doing? You're throwing yourself into a loveless marriage, with someone you can't trust." I burst into tears, but my mother was unmoved. "If you decide to go down this path, don't expect to come back. This family has no place for you anymore." And then she turned and walked away, as if I had never been her daughter. As the bells rang, signaling the start of the wedding, I clutched the bouquet in my hands, trying to calm myself. David was waiting for me at the end of the path, with the gentle smile I had fallen in love with. But deep inside, a small voice rang out, "Does he really belong to me?" The door opened, all eyes turned to me. I took each step, feeling the emptiness without my father by my side. I remembered the stories from my childhood, when I believed that one day my father would take my hand me over to the man he trusted. But now, I was alone. And as I approached David, as his hand clasped mine, I wondered, was this really a happy beginning, or just the first step into the abyss of a mistake? 13 years can be a long time, enough for everything to change, enough for the past to become a distant memory. But there are also wounds that, no matter how much time passes, will never heal. I am Scarlett, now David's wife and the mother of 2 adorable children, Ethan, a 10-year-old boy who is active, and Lily, a 7-year-old girl who is as sweet as a little angel. My life, from the outside, seems perfect. We live in a cozy house with a garden full of roses, the flowers I have always loved since childhood. Every morning, I wake up to the scent of coffee and the laughter of children, to the gentle embrace of David. I have it all, a family, a home, a seemingly peaceful life. But that peace is like a beautiful but fragile painting, just a strong wind can make it shatter. And that wind is named Amara. That day, I was standing in the kitchen, preparing dinner for my family. The smell of food wafted through the air, mixed with the laughter of the children playing in the yard. David wasn't home yet, he had an important meeting at work. I smiled slightly, feeling grateful for what I had. But then the doorbell rang. I wiped my hands on my apron, walked to open the door. When the door swung open, I was stunned. Amara. My sister stood there, still as beautiful as ever. It seemed like time had not touched her. That face, those eyes, that figure, everything was just as I remembered it, but there was something frighteningly unfamiliar about it. A light breeze blew past, stirring her long black hair. My heart was pounding. I didn't know what I was feeling, surprise, anger, or fear. "Hello, Scarlett." Her voice was low and soft, but it carried an invisible pressure that weighed heavily on me. I stood still, my hand unconsciously tightening on the doorframe. Thousands of questions swirled in my head. Why was she here? Why, after all these years, after everything that had happened, did she come back? "Can you come in?" A simple question, but it made me hesitate. I looked at her, then looked toward the backyard, where the children were playing, completely unaware that the storm of the past was about to flood into their lives. Finally, I quietly stepped aside, letting her in. She walked into the living room, looking around as if trying to remember everything. I felt a sense of unease rising in my heart. I had never thought of this day, the day when Amara would come back, set foot in my house, step into the life I had worked so hard to build. "What are you doing here?" My voice was dry. Amara turned to look at me, her eyes full of meaning. "I think it's time we talked." I laughed, a laugh that didn't have any joy in it. 13 years. You left for 13 years without a word, and now you want to talk? She was silent, then slowly walked closer to me. "Scarlett, I know you hate me. But I can't go on living without coming back to you." I narrowed my eyes. "Looking for you? Or for David?" The moment I said that, I saw her eyes waver. It was only for a split second, but I saw it. My heart suddenly clenched. Anger had been bubbling inside me for a long time, but I had always tried to bury it deep down. But now, with her standing right in front of me, it all seemed to explode. I looked at Amara, searching for an answer in her eyes. But she was still the same, mysterious, unpredictable, and dangerous. "What do you want, Amara?" She tilted her head slightly, then smiled softly. "Can we sit down and talk for a bit? Maybe about family. And about the past." I clenched my fists. Family? What family? I had been abandoned by my own family. I had been betrayed by my sister. I had built a new family, and now she came back, saying she wanted to talk about family? I looked straight into Amara's eyes, feeling a chill run down my spine. I knew, the peace I had had for the past 13 years was over. I sat there, facing Amara, in the living room that I had once considered my most peaceful place. But now, this space was no different from a silent battlefield, where every word about to be uttered could be a knife cutting the last string that still bound us. Amara looked at me, her eyes sharp but no longer proud as before. I wondered, was it regret, or simply fatigue after so many years of running away? "Scarlett," she spoke, her voice low and soft, as if searching for the right words. "I don't expect you to forgive me right away. But, do you really want to erase everything?" I clenched my fists on the armrests of the chair. I had dreamed of this moment, the day when Amara would return and I could face her without feeling weak. But now, all I felt was a cold emptiness in my heart. Erase everything? I curled my lips. "Wasn't it you who did that 13 years ago?" She bowed her head, her shoulders shaking slightly. I wasn't sure if it was from genuine emotion, or just a way to soften my heart. But I couldn't allow myself to be drawn into it again. I stood up, walked to the window, and looked out at the garden where Ethan and Lily were still playing carefree. They didn't know that inside this house, their mother was facing a part of her past that she had wanted to bury forever. "You chose your path, Amara." I turned back, my gaze determined. "And I chose mine too. We have nothing more to say to each other." She looked up at me, her eyes bewildered. "Scarlett, we are sisters after all." I took a deep breath, feeling the pain rising in my heart, but still tried to keep my voice calm. "No, Amara. Family is more than blood. Family is trust, love, people who don't abandon each other in times of trouble. You abandoned me when I needed you the most. And now, I don't need you anymore." The words rang out, decisively, like a final sentence. I saw Amara's shoulders slump. She knew that between us there was nothing left but a past full of wounds that had never healed. She slowly stood up, her eyes sad but no longer trying to hold on. "Scarlett. I'm sorry." I didn't reply. Not because I hadn't expected this apology, but because I understood there were mistakes that couldn't be erased with just one sentence. She turned away, walking toward the door. I didn't stop her. And when the door slammed behind her, I knew I had made the right decision. I stood there for a moment, silently looking at the door as if it were the boundary between past and present. A gentle breeze blew through, carrying the scent of roses from the garden outside. David walked in, placing his hand on my shoulder. "Are you okay?" I turned around, smiling slightly. "Yes. I'm fine." And this time, I truly believed it. Lessons learned. Amara and I's story is not a rare personal tragedy. In life, there are relationships, whether they are blood relatives, friends, or lovers, that cannot always be saved. Sometimes, letting go does not mean hatred, but simply choosing peace for yourself. We are often taught that family is everything, that we must forgive because blood is something that cannot be changed. But in reality, family is not just a title defined by blood. Real family is the people who are there for you, who support you, and who don't hurt you for their own gain. If there's one lesson I want to share, it's this: learn to set boundaries. Learn to protect yourself from toxic relationships, no matter who they are. Cutting ties doesn't mean resentment. It means you value yourself enough to stop being hurt. And that's not weakness, it's strength.